Williams. Welcome everyone. My name is Kevin Williams. I'm a senior research fellow at SALISES. Today, our webinar is the third in the speaker series. The title of today's talk is COVID-19, New Imperatives for Food Security. The moderator for today is Dr. Patricia Northover, Senior Research Fellow at SALISES and Chair for the Sustainable Rural and Agricultural Development Research Cluster. She will moderate our the talk today, and from all indication, we expect a lively discussion. I'll join you at the end of the talk to just wrap up. So Dr. Northover, it's over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Williams, for introducing me. We anticipate, as Kevin said, a wonderful discussion today. We have two speakers, Mr. Errol Grant and Dr. Stanbury, who is well known as the former permanent secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture and our campus registrar. I just wanted to begin by introducing some brief notes on our speaker series and on the context that we face today in terms of food security and in particular hunger in the world. So our SALISES, the Sustainable Rural and Agricultural Development Cluster, had embarked on a speaker series. The overall arching theme for the speaker series is COVID-19 Discourses on Fleeing the Plantation, a Modern Marronage for Sustainable Food Systems. And so far, we've had 3 presentations. The first one was on food systems in crisis. The second one was on Afro-descendant seed infrastructures. And today, we're going to be looking at new imperatives for food security. Now, we'll be continuing this speaker series until the end of this year, and then we'll resume it in 2022. But our next speaker will take place in September, and we anticipate to be looking at positioning biotechnology to better serve Afro-descendant farmers and rural Jamaica in the Caribbean. And our speaker then will be Dr. Sylvia Mitchell, and that will take place on September the 1st, 2021. So we're going to skip August in our speaker series and then continue again in September. So we do hope that you will join us as we elucidate on the issues that relate to sustainable food systems internationally, but with specific reference to small states in the Caribbean. Now, why are we gathered here today? We know that with COVID-19 and the global disruption of supply chains right across the world, the shutdown and the inconveniences that have been introduced, but also livelihoods and employment has been dramatically impacted by this global health crisis. So in 2019, before the COVID pandemic, it was estimated that we would have 690 million people, or roughly 9% of the total world population, suffering from hunger, being undernourished. If trends continue and trends to increase hunger in the world began an uptick from 2014, and if these trends continue, it is estimated that hunger will exceed 240 million in 2030. So we're not on target to meet our SDG 2 goals, which is zero hunger and the eradication of all forms of malnutrition. So this is prior to the COVID-19 epidemic. Currently, in 2021, the World Food Program indicates that we'll have 869 million people are hungry today. So that's already 30 million more than the projected increase in 2030 for the global hunger estimates. So we're way off track in terms of managing the issues related to hunger in the region and within the international context. And I was wanting to bring to your attention that when it comes to the description of the characteristics of of those who suffer from hunger, children are a large part of that problem. In 2019, 21.3% or 144 million children under the age of 5 were estimated to be stunted. And 6.9% or 47 million wasted, while at least 340 million children suffer from micronutrient deficiencies. So we have a massive problem in our hands when it comes to food security dynamics. But I also wanted to highlight, when we turn to the region, that it is estimated that we have currently around 8 million people who are suffering from hunger in the region. And it depends. If we're looking at the CARICOM region, that estimate is around 8 million. But if we look at the Greater Caribbean, that estimate would be increased. One of the things we highlight in the Caribbean, though, is that Haiti accounts for approximately 60% of CARICOM's population, which is 17.5 million, and approximately 90% of the undernourished persons in the region. So when we're talking about hunger in the Caribbean, its concentration tends to be largely in Haiti. And even today, as we speak, there's a political turmoil with the assassination of President Moise, and there's a constitutional and political crisis, which didn't begin today, but has really reached a dramatic climax in that country with this radical new development. So Haiti not only suffers from this acute level of hunger, but we can see that there's a political context in which the ability to govern and manage those populations for sustainable well-being and to meet the SDG goals is really under severe threat. So we want to emphasize that hunger in the region is a problem. It has concentrations in particular regions, but then in Venezuela, in 2018, that is before the deepening of the crisis with the sanctions and the internal political difficulties, 21.2% of the population suffer from hunger. In Nicaragua, it's 17%. In Bolivia, it's 17.1%. And in Guatemala, it's 15.2%. And this is 2018 numbers. So we can anticipate that these numbers are really dated already in terms of the levels of hunger and food insecurity that is being experienced in the region. So I just wanted to begin with that context to let us understand that we're facing an unprecedented crisis in terms of the situation as it relates to food hunger and food insecurity in the region. And in this panel, we have two speakers. One is a farmer and one is an administrator with long roots in the food and agriculture business. And he will definitely bring more information to light for us on the Caribbean and perhaps a laser focus on Jamaica. But we will invite them to try and look at this situation that we're facing today and see what lessons we can learn from their presentation for food security in the Caribbean, and in particular with a special focus on Jamaica today, but also within the context of climate change. We've just had our earliest hurricane in the season arriving, Hurricane Elsa, and in the last 66 years was the first hurricane to hit Barbados, so that we're living broadly in unprecedented times. So I would like to now introduce our first speaker with that overview of our challenges. And our first speaker today will be Dr. Donovan Stanberry, who, as I said before, is a registrar for the University of the West Indies, MONA, since August 2019. He is someone who has a long history in agriculture, and he graduated with honors from the Moscow Agriculture Academy, now the Russian State Agricultural University, and with a master's degree in agricultural economics way back in 1992. Since then, he has been in government service, the Planning Institute of Jamaica, where he was a senior economist and the head of the agricultural unit until March 1996. And then he was recruited to the Ministry of Public Utilities and Transport as a senior director responsibility for water, which, as we know, is the lifeblood of our agricultural sector. In January 1998, he was transferred to the Ministry of Water as a senior director and then promoted to technical director, chief technical director for water in 2000 in the Ministry of Water and Housing. Since November 2004, he was appointed permanent secretary in the Ministry of Land and Environment, from where he was then transferred to the Ministry of Agriculture and Lands in April 2006. So he has had a very varied history in public service, all focused on the central thematics impacting on food security and agricultural development. So since 2006, he was permanent secretary at the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, which was later merged with the Ministry of Industry to form the Ministry of Industry, Investment, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries. Mr. Stanbury has remained as a permanent secretary of the merged Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries until 2019. So he has represented the government of Jamaica in several fora, therefore, from water policy and management, environment, agriculture, MSME, development, industry and commerce, and he has played major and sometimes pioneering roles in the formulation of policies and legislation in the subject areas under his various ministries' portfolio. He has also negotiated numerous loans and grants with international development partners for plethora of projects and programs in the various ministries he has served, and overseen the successful implementation of these projects and programs. Despite his hectic workload, he has managed to complete his MBA from the Mona School of Business and Management with distinction and a doctorate in environmental management from the University of the West Indies. He is also a certified teacher in the Russian language. So this outstanding public servant who is now leading the charge at the University of the West Indies as our campus registrar, I'd now turn it over to him, who so well recognized in Jamaica that he received the Order of Distinction, and he continues to serve both the public and the broader spiritual community as an elder in the Church of God. So Mr. Donovan Stanberry, Dr. Donovan Stanberry, we turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Northover. Very happy to participate in this forum. It is my means of keeping in touch with my first love, which is agriculture. Today we focus on the matter of new imperatives for food security under the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'd just like to share this presentation with you. I'm trying to sort out how I... So I want to take us back. My screen is not moving, but I'll proceed anyway. I want to take us back to where we are coming from. What is the definition of food security? And if we look at the Ministry of the government's Food and Nutritional Security Policy of 2013, it defines food security. Can you go back to the first slide, please? Okay, defines food security, and this definition, of course, is adopted from the World Food Summit definition in 1996. A nation is said to be food secure when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food, which meets the dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. So from the definition, we see that food security has a number of dimensions. There is the physical availability of food, so that our production systems and whatever food we import must be able to deliver sufficient quantities to satisfy our dietary needs. But food security is more than just the physical availability. Food security also addresses the aspect of access in terms of affordability and being able to access food by virtue of our financial means. Food security also concerns nutritional quality of our food. In other words, we must not only have physical food, but the food must be able to satisfy our dietary needs, our nutritional needs, and of course the food ought to be safe. And more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, our food security has to do with sustainability, because we can be food secure today, and at another point in time, we are not. So our food systems must be stable, survive an economic shock. We have the climate change, and our food security must be robust and resilient enough to be able to deliver, notwithstanding climate change and natural disasters. Before we get to the COVID-19 dimension, I'd just like to take us back historically and make the point that we were never structured as a country to be food secure. We know our past coming from the plantation system. Our economy was so organized on a monoculture basis, fully export oriented for one crop just to produce sugar. And all our need for food was satisfied by imports. So from the get-go, we were never structured to be food secure, to grow what we eat and to eat what we grow. We have to credit the slaves who were given plots to produce food to help with their own sustenance. We have to credit them for attempting the first attempt at anything that we would call diversification in our food systems and food sovereignty. And later on, after slavery was abolished in 1838, the ex-slaves sought to establish what we call the peasantry. But their efforts, as we know, were systematically undermined, and they were relegated to marginal hillside lands. And today, unfortunately, not much has changed in that regard. The last census we did was in 2007. The Agriculture Census states that 75% of all farms in Jamaica were in fact under 1 acre. And together, all of those 75% of the farms only constituted 15% of all farmlands. That was in 2007, nearly 15, 16 years ago. And I'm sure that the situation would have worsened since. We haven't done another census since that time. So it can be seen that from an historical standpoint, food security has never been an objective. We are structurally conditioned to import and to satisfy our needs from importation, and very little regard in terms of building an infrastructure to produce the food that we need and in the sufficient varieties. The policy environment, I would say also, that has prevailed, certainly through independence to this time, is also not supportive, not accommodating of any efforts at achieving food security. Our best lands in terms of their fertility, in terms of their flatness, in terms of terrain and so on, have been devoted to our export crops, sugar, banana, etc. And those lands have the best infrastructure in terms of roads and irrigation. And all of those lands are devoted to producing traditional exports, which we know have been getting a real beating with the liberalization of global markets. We have lost our preferential access. But those lands have still been occupied by those crops largely. Only 9% of all irrigable lands in Jamaica are in fact irrigated. And so there is a significant dependence on rain-fed agriculture. And that is going to affect the stability of our food production. That will militate against our capacity to produce enough food on a consistent basis. We have to address that if we are serious about attaining a sufficient level of food security. We have also had a manufacturing sector that has been built and bred and nurtured on the whole concept of importing cheap agricultural raw materials from countries in Latin America, South and Central America. And a very little value is added here, just a little mixing and packaging. And that process has been facilitated for many, many, many years by waivers of import duties on those importation of raw material. And that did not incentivize our local farmers to produce enough to supply the manufacturing sector. We have also had a trade policy that has been biased to importation of cheap food. And that, of course, has been aided and abetted by the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO, because we were told that we should stick to services, we should smile and invite tourists, and others will take care of our food. That has decimated, for instance, the local dairy industry. In the early 90s, we opened the floodgate to allow for cheap milk powder to come in, and that has destroyed our dairy industry from a production base of 39 million liters of milk. At best, we are now doing about 12 or 13. So that has reduced milk production almost threefold with the exit of over 500 dairy farmers. We have not been able to get back there because we had subscribed to the policy dictates of the Bretton Woods institution that say to us, oh, you just do your services and we will supply your foods. That's a very dangerous position. We saw, for instance, in 2008, when we had the last major food crisis, that the first instinct of those net exporting countries was to ban exportation of foods. And that puts us in a very, very vulnerable position. And generally speaking, the infrastructure to support production, distribution, and marketing of food locally has been very, very weak. So what has been the result of all of that? Those historical forces and our current infrastructure. We have seen a staggering food import bill. On the screen, you will see that we have figures from Statistical Institute of Jamaica from 2014 that has seen our food import bill hovering over $1 billion United States dollar. In comparison to that, I don't have those figures, but I know them. At best, we are exporting probably 250 million US dollar worth of food. So the balance of trade in terms of food has been overwhelmingly in the favor of imports. 2019, we must have gone crazy because over 2018, our food import bill increased by nearly $100 million. And even though 2020 was a COVID year, we see that our food import bill was in fact greater than 2018 and all the years prior. That's not a good sign, and that certainly is not sustainable. So what are the new concerns with COVID-19? In the first instance, in a year 2020, where we had 9 months of pandemic, where global supply chains were disrupted, and where it was challenging to import. Our bill, $933 million US, was in fact greater than what it was in 2018. What that says to me is that we might have imported a smaller quantity in relation to 2018, but because food prices have gone sky high since the pandemic, it impacts our bill. 933 million is not small money, and we have to do our endeavor best to ensure that we can replace a portion of that. And my estimate is that we can replace at least 30, 35% to 40% of that quite easily without subjecting our people to higher prices for locally produced food. We have seen last year in the pandemic, our farmers would have lost significant amount of their crops. They had to dump it, spoil in the field, because they have lost a significant market, which is the tourism market. And that, of course, will impact the quality of life of our farmers, because it impacts directly their earnings, and not only theirs, but their children. We are talking about 220,000 farmers. And if we estimate that each one of them has 4 dependents, then we are talking about almost 1 million people who would have suffered loss of income as a result of the loss of the tourism market during the pandemic and the consequent impact on their income. At the same time, ladies and gentlemen, we now have serious concerns about access to food. Dr. Northover, in her introductory remarks, pointed out that the Caribbean, the number of food people in the Caribbean who don't have access to sufficient food was about 8 million, 90% of that from Haiti. So in the Caribbean, in normal times outside of Haiti, we really don't have the kind of chronic malnutrition that we see in other regions in the world. But with the downturn of our economy, the stunting of economic growth, with the fallout in tourism, we have seen, and that has been announced by Statin, that our unemployment rate went up in January 2021 to 8.9%, up from 7.3% the previous January. And Statin also did a special survey that shows that 54% of the respondents in that survey indicated that they had experienced decline in their income since the onset of COVID. So the economic factors, the loss of job, the unemployment rate going up, the loss of income will definitely mean that people will have less access to food, economic access that is, will not be able to afford it. Ladies and gentlemen, as if that was not enough, the FAO is now telling us that food prices have gone up. So for instance, their monthly food price index showed a 38% increase in May 2021 relative to May 2020, and that was the highest level in 10 years, that is since 2011. This is alarming, and anybody who goes to the supermarket here in Jamaica will in fact see that the prices of food literally going up almost every week, every month. But not only have food prices gone up internationally, but also the inputs, because our agriculture is dependent significantly on importation of inputs. So for instance, animal feed for our livestock industry, for instance, chemicals and fertilizer would have gone up. And also we would see that reflected in the price of locally produced food. Our yams, yams was going through the roof a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago, one had to pay as much as $200 per pound. So all of these factors are in fact impacting our status in terms of our food security. Of course, the higher prices globally, as recorded by the FAO Food Price Index, those global food prices have been driven principally by China's almost insatiable demand for food. That demand has been increasing and has not abated in many, many years because of as the Chinese economy grow, people have more disposable income and demanding more and more of the world's food resources. We have also had the issue of drought in major food producing countries such as Argentina and Brazil. And that is a ever-present danger to the world's food security. The climate change, the frequent and prolonged drought, severe droughts, the frequency of weather episodes and their intensity, all of those are impacting global food security, global food production. And we are not immune from those impacts here in Jamaica. We have seen, even ELSA last week, the impact it has had on both on livestock and crop production. And so we have to increase the resilience of our food production systems to be able to withstand the impacts of climate change. And significantly, we have to note also that the food price increases globally have also been influenced by the diversion of food to fuel. Increasingly, we're having more food products going to biofuels, etc. So the alarming trend we are seeing as recorded by the FAO in global food prices will definitely impact our 2021 food import bill. Recall that we are at 933 million in 2020 last year, compared with a normal year of 2018, where we were 909 million. So with these price increases globally, we are definitely going to see our food import bill increasing, even if the physical quantities that we import remain at the 2020 level. So higher food prices in 2021, coupled with the continuing adverse economic impact of the pandemic, manifested in unemployment and loss of income at the household level, will definitely exacerbate the issue of economic access to food for our people here in Jamaica. Now, as all of that is going on, we observe what I would refer to as some inexplicable actions on the part of the government. At a time when we should be making more lands available to our farmers. Recall that I said earlier that 75% of our farmers are operating on less than 1 hectare of land. And together they only own 15% of all the lands. But against that background, it is really inexplicable that the government is insisting on this Bernard Lodge development, which will rob agriculture of the country's most fertile lands. Yes, there are some token thing there to get a few farmers on and so on, but these housing developments that are contemplated will take huge track of the most fertile lands in the country and move them into housing development. I think given our food security situation, given our unsustainable food import bill, that we're going in the wrong direction. I also want to point out that we have been seeing a trend. So for instance, the agriculture census tells us that between 1996 and 2007, the total area in farming in agriculture declined from 404,000 hectares to 325,000 hectares. Remember that the last census was 2007. I really shudder to think what the figure is now, because more and more increasingly, we are seeing more of our agricultural lands being diverted to housing construction. And of course, we have observed a worrying trend of farmers being pushed off their lands to accommodate these large developments. And these cases that I've highlighted here in Planting Gardens, in St. Thomas in Bernard Lodge, in St. Catherine, in Longpan in Trelawney, are well documented and well ventilated in the public media. So it's not really a figment of my imagination. That is not the way we should be going in the other direction, empowering our farmers with more lands and support services to ensure that we can feed ourselves in a sustainable way. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to end with what I would refer to as some imperative for action. What do we need to do in the face of this pandemic to reverse the historical preconditioning that I have outlined earlier, to reverse the unfriendly policy environment and to encourage greater production and lift our level of food security? A number of things I just want to highlight. Four. In the first instance, we have to rescue the Bernard Lodge lands. Some 18,000 hectares of good fertile lands have been returned to the government because of the collapse of the sugar industry in Clarendon and St. Catherine. The greatest temptation for these lands to be diverted to housing development will be if we do not engage those lands effectively in agricultural production. And so what I think needs to happen is that we need to formulate a master plan for the use of those lands based on soil capability studies to see what the land can grow, what are the best crops suited for it, and in a orderly and systematic way, get those lands into the hands of those who want to engage in farming. It cannot be that we just leave them there and then the developer that comes along, first come, first serve. We have to be deliberate about it if we want to secure these lands. Secondly, we have to prioritize production of grains, sorghum, corn, etc., for the livestock industry. I say this because if one does detailed analysis of our food import bill, it would be seen that almost 50% of the things that we import, the food, really relate to animal feeds and product of animal origin. It therefore means that we are most vulnerable in the area of animal protein. And if we're going to build that area of agriculture, we have to have a local production of animal feeds to bring down our food import bill. We do have the capacity to feed ourselves in poultry and in pork, in eggs. We are self-sufficient, but we have to bear in mind that the major inputs for those industries are imported, the animal feed. And if we're going to have a sustainable livestock system, if we're going to be able to provide ourselves with adequate quantities of animal protein in a sustainable way, we have got to address the question of pastures. We have got to produce our own grains here in Jamaica. Small ruminants, for instance, is very important. We import over 90% of the beef and not the beef, the mutton and the goat meat that we consume here. We have got to reverse that. Thirdly, we have got to concentrate on the development of orchards. A significant portion of our food import bill is really the importation of puree and concentrates for our juice manufacturing sector, those raw material. Also, we have to exploit the export potential of our fruits. Our fruits are, we have the best quality fruits in the world, or mangoes, or you name it. And there is an export potential there. Also, our consumption, per capita consumption of food, fruits rather, is below what is acceptable. And having regard to the high incidences of non-communicable diseases, we really need to step up consumption of fruits and vegetables. So for all those reasons, I think we need to focus on orchard. Orchard is not something that we embrace in Jamaica. Ackee has now become our #1 agricultural export, run about 25, 30 million US a year. But it is interesting that to export that value, that amount of ackee, we literally go around the country and collecting two boxes from different farms. The concept of an ackee orchard, for instance, has eluded us as a people, and we really need to engage. And quite a bit of those Bernard Lodge land, of course, could be used for orchards for fruits. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to focus on the blue economy. We have vast resources. Our exclusive economic zone is nearly 9-10 times our land mass as a country. And therein lies enormous resources that we are not exploiting sufficiently. Our fishermen are not equipped to go there in the deep to harvest our large pelagic resources. And so they tend to concentrate on the near reef, so much so that we have overexploited our reef resources, and we need to replenish them. So we need to focus on the blue economy, because the people, we do in fact eat a significant amount of fish, and we do actually import huge quantities of fish, sardines, mackerel, salted fish, bangamere from Guyana, etc., etc. And I think that we need to tap into that. Ladies and gentlemen, these things are urgent. And as a nation, we can only claim true independence and true sovereignty when in fact we can feed ourselves. Thank you very much.
Much for that fantastic presentation highlighting the historical drivers, the fundamental biases in the system against the small farmer, the policy biases, the trade biases, and now the developmental biases in terms of projects and activities that are being projected that are running inimical and counter to the trends to support food security, facilitate the support of rural livelihoods, as well as reduce the propensity to hunger and malnutrition. So fantastic presentation. I wanted to just alert our audience that we began late because we were having some technical difficulties, and I wanted to apologize for that. But we have run into a slight constraint in terms of time. Dr. Stanbury said he had a meeting at 2, which he would have to leave. That's still confirmed.
2:30.
2:30. Okay. All right then. So I wanted to ask him to stay with us then, since we have a little bit more time with him, and allow our second speaker, Mr. Errol Grant, who I'll introduce shortly. But just some rules that I didn't mention at the beginning. Could you please, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of the screen, that you'll see little text boxes above Q&A. Or if there are any questions that are now fielded in the chat rooms, then we will ask those questions after we have our second presentation. So would now like to introduce our second speaker, Mr. Errol Joseph Grant, who is a farmer and an advocate for the legislation of ganja and against the disenfranchising of our peasants and indigenous farmers. He's also a natural health consultant, herbalist, and reflexologist, the host of a natural health program on Sun City Radio, that's in Portmore, called Healthier You, which is aired every Friday at 9:35 a.m. to 10 a.m. So do check that out if you're living in the vicinity. So he's also into sports, healthy person, healthy body. He's a marathon runner, and he was made a lifetime honoree for his continued participation in the Reggae Marathon, which is held in Negril, Jamaica in December every year. So more power to Mr. Grant. He's also an event manager, planner, and coordinator. And he's in the community race director of the George Lee Memorial 6K road race. And he's also the creator of Sports Spectacular for Portmore Week celebration. So he's a community activist, development agent, but he's also a farmer, which means that he's concerned with the nation, feeding the nation and ensuring the security of our population, the health and the life of our population. Always liked this comment. I think it's Norman Grant likes to say, if you ate today, thank a farmer. So we need to thank our farmers, because at the bedrock of our ability to survive is our ability to eat. And that cannot happen without the hard work, dedication, and investment that farmers make daily to meet our needs. So I'd now like to turn the floor over to Mr. Errol Grant and ask him to give his presentation. After which we'll then have the Q&A section. I anticipate Mr. Grant will speak for approximately 20-25 minutes to bring us his views on new imperatives of food security, a Jamaican perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Northover. Thank you very much. I'm quite honored to be able to address the panel and also our listeners, those who have joined us to hear what is going on in this forum. COVID-19 has undoubtedly affected all classes of people around the world, whether you are rich or poor. There's one thing it has taught us, and that is you can be rich today and poor tomorrow. Well, here in Jamaica, COVID-19 is now public enemy number one. And I say that to say this. There definitely has been some devastating effects on our homes from the loss of jobs, loss of properties, loss of families, and without a doubt, loss of our independence. We are being dictated to as to how we should live, how we should eat, where we should go. All of these things are part of what we are suffering now. And of course, with our food, we are being forced to eat foods that we don't grow. And that has affected us seriously. If you look at the health situation in Jamaica now, even the Ministry of Health is saying that the healthcare industry is overwhelmed. Why? Because our people are not being fed the right kind of food. So the scarcity of good food in Jamaica has now taken a toll on our health. I must say that what we have just heard from the Honorable, I call him Honorable, you know, and I tell you why, because I've been listening to him for a very long time now, and he has never stopped informing us about the kind of foods we are eating, the type of foods we should be growing, and he has always been presenting to the government ways to use the food to bring the people out of poverty, right? So I am very thankful for the presentation, and in listening to him, he has now put me into another mode, because what we are now doing from this, when we leave this forum, I am going to be more on the attacking side as of now, because health is very important. Our farmers have been under pressure from before the advent of COVID-19. Their farms are being confiscated, and I deliberately use the word confiscated, by the land grabbers, including our government, for what they call urban development. Our food production is reduced immensely, while our food importation has increased at the same rate. To farmers, we see this as a deliberate action. Why? We thought that we would be protected. because we were promised that they're going to be putting idle farmlands back into farm production to boost the farming sector. This is not so. What is happening now is the reverse. They are taking out farmlands and they are not being put back into food production. They are now converting the farmlands to housing schemes, while there are lands that are not arable, which can be used for building houses. They are ignoring those lands. There are lands also that were prepared for housing solutions, and they are turning their backs on those lands deliberately. We see them trying to save those lands, especially in Portmore. They're trying to save those lands for what we call the Portmore Beverly Hills. So they put all the commoners on the flat where the food is supposed to be grown and saving the hills for their compatriots. That's how we are looking at it. And this is a reality. And I think this is a forum to express the way we actually are thinking of the situation here in Portmore. We find that some of the farmers who were evicted had to flee. I mean, flee because they refused to come off the land. And they had to flee as a result of they being fearful of losing their lives. They've already lost out now. Many of them are confused as to what to do because a lot of them have been left out. They have not received any compensation. No one has spoken to them re their transfer from where they are to wherever they said they would put them. And no one is even trying to help them regain their livelihood. And this is creating a lot of misery among them. Frustration is gone to its highest ebb. Now we are being left to the mercy of food merchants. And that's where the problem starts to get worse. The safety of our food is now of great concern, as Dr. Stanbury said, which is as great a concern to us as the poor quality of foods that are coming into the island. The advent of COVID-19 created a void, which increased our concern. Why? What we have found is that due to the COVID-19 situation, pandemic or plandemic, whatever they want to call it, food exportation from certain countries were cut. Now, we were also, even though we weren't exporting as much as we should, we were also exporting some of the food that came to naught. On top of that, the country was already flooded with GMOs. That's a genetically modified organisms they call food, which nowadays they are calling it genetically improved food. When you hear them saying that, the authorities saying that, that's this type of food they're talking about. Foods that were altered, like tomatoes that don't attract flies, corn that don't attract worms. That's the kind of food that's coming into the island. Vegetables that can't spoil, right? We are an avocado country. When Jamaica start bear pear, we have pear in abundance, right? There are people importing pears from America, and they are allowed by the system to do that, right? So with them importing foods that we grow, just imagine the impact on us and on Jamaica, where our food is concerned. The authorities would prefer to get rid of our farms, and that's the conclusion we are now at, to allow more importations of technologically farmed foods. There have been the Minister of Agriculture has been saying in his speeches that they will be going all out to provide facilities for people who want to go into technological farming. Now, we see technological farming as the farming we see it from laboratories. We would prefer him saying farming with technology, because we could use equipment with our farming. We don't need the chemicals. All we need is equipment, right? And when I say this about the chemicals, I must bring this back to the fore. When we were given some, well, not on this side in Portmore, not with the Bernard Lodge farmers, but farmers in St. Elizabeth were given fertilizers made from human waste, which produce some worms that eat everything, including the topsoil. And up to today, the farms that use that type of fertilizer are still having problems with worms, keep coming back. We had advised them against it, and they turned their backs on us, because no way can human waste be used to fertilize food. Food is something we are supposed to be consuming. What the human has excreted is the waste of the same food you ate. So when you do that, you're actually poisoning yourself. It's the same thing with breathing, inhaling carbon dioxide. You're actually poisoning your own system. So we are quite perturbed over the government pushing their agenda for technologically farmed food and what it is doing to our environment, because actually it's not contributing to a better environment, because the gases that come from those foods actually help to deteriorate our environment. Jamaica's constitution specifies the right to enjoy a healthy and productive environment. Yet, our minister and our Ministry of Agriculture is doing the opposite. I am trying to figure out what is happening, because in the World Environmental Day celebration, our Minister of Agriculture made a statement, and this is an excerpt from what he said. He said, and here I quote, "Jamaica's constitution specifies the right to enjoy a healthy and productive environment free from the threat of injury or damage from environmental abuse and degradation of the ecological heritage as one of the fundamental rights and freedoms." Now, with this being quoted by the minister, and to see the same authorities taking away the farmlands from the farmers, what are we to think? Are they aware of the quality of foods that they are getting rid of? Are they aware of the safety of the foods that they are importing and the foods that they are getting rid of? Are they aware of the effects that these kind of foods will be having on our citizens? In fact, it has already been shown that even those who are fat are malnourished. It has already been shown that most of the people who are consuming these foods, their immune systems are compromised. And the simple fact, if dust blow over them, you hear them say them catch cold, right? Influenza hits them with a strong impact. People are suffering with asthma, the asthma attacks have increased. People are just dying without showing any symptoms because what? Their bodies are compromised, their immune systems are compromised. And this is creating a very serious impact on the healthcare system in Jamaica. The behavior of the government is confusing with this. They are aware and are quoting what the Constitution says, yet they are depriving us of the farmlands by pushing their agenda to replace organic food. Dr. Stanbury spoke of good food. Farmers, we call it organic food. They are replacing the organic food with technologically farmed foods. That is what we are scared of, because it not only just affects us inside, it affects us also mentally. That is why our children are finding it difficult to learn in school. The foods they are getting are empty, low quality foods. So the brain isn't getting any feeding. Their brains are suffering from deprivation of nutrients. Why is it people with mental disorder, the numbers are growing? The food. It comes right back to the diet. Our foods are of very poor quality. Why? Because they are more pushing the pretty packages than they are pushing the natural food. Well, we know everything that is natural has a different taste. It has its own state. Yams taste like yams, potatoes taste like potatoes, vegetables taste like they are. The tomato tastes different from the broccoli. The lettuce tastes different, it has its own flavor. We need to bring our people back to that time. The days when you used to see someone just pick a leaf of lettuce and stand there and chew it and enjoy it, bite a tomato like a bite of a mango and eat it, those days are gone, because they are now programmed to eating false foods, the sugary foods, the salty foods. That's the program the authorities now have the people on. They were talking about children in school being hyperactive, right? And the reason for that is because the foods have too much sugar. So we suggested to them, in fact, I suggested to them that they should replace the simple sugar with honey. It was refuted by one of the politicians who said that honey is too expensive. But they are not thinking of the amount of money they are spending overseas to bring food into the island. They should cut that and put some of that money into honey farming. Right? Now, with the rest of the foods, we have made some recommendations, and we're asking the government to look into these recommendations. Look into what we are talking about. This is not something to play around with. And the imperatives that we think should be put in place, which I think will also endorse what our good doctor just stated. One, the Jamaican government must adhere to the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Peasants and others who live and work in rural areas. Two, there must be no change of use of farmlands. What we need is more farmlands, not less farmlands. The government must invest and create policies to protect organic farming and the farmers. 4, all arable lands must be put into farming, and farmers' markets must be established in each parish with proper facilities. 5, finally, the safety of our foods must be the top priority of the Ministry of Agriculture. Now, these are the imperatives as farmers we recommend to the Jamaican government, which when implemented will provide food safety for our Jamaican people. We definitely want to keep our people healthy with good food, not sickly with imported garbage and technologically farmed foods. Thank you very much for allowing me to make this presentation, and I hope we can go from here and get stronger and stronger as we go forward.
Excellent, excellent. Powerful presentation from Errol, Mr. Grant, marathon runner. Walk the walk and talk the talk.
Talk.
So that is it. That is it. So Errol has put us to emphasize the differences between the rhetoric of particular government policies and the actions, the practice. So there's a gap, you know,
Yes.
between the expectations that we have of our representatives to lead us towards having healthy diets,
Right.
being food secure, and having our populations being able to look forward to health in every dimension: mental health, physical health, environmental health, to assure us that these things are at the top of their agenda. So Mr. Errol Grant has made a very forceful appeal for the government to halt, which is being reinforced by Mr. Dr. Stanberry, to halt unsustainable practices, reverse practices that are taking us backwards rather than forwards, and to really to transform the way in which we look at food, the way in which we think of technology being applied to food, and how it is that we are moving forward as a country, as a people, within the Jamaican context, but internationally. Everything that was said today, I must say,
Yes.
is reinforced by the latest State of the Food Security and Nutrition for the World 2020 report, which speaks to transforming food systems for affordable and healthy diets. So
Right.
we're not speaking from a narrow insular perspective. We're resonating with a world that is saying our food systems are in crisis. We are in crisis. The world is in crisis, but it is a man-made crisis. It is not a divine crisis. It's something that we could change if we were able to do what we need to do. One of the fundamental questions that Errol asked, are they aware? Are they aware of the effects of the actions that are being taken? And he also emphasized the psychological stress of being in a situation where you're not being looked after and you're eating unhealthy food, as he says, garbage food rather than good food, that is leading to the impact, as I pointed out earlier, on our children. So micronutrient deficiencies that impact on your aspects of full, healthy, and well-being. So this whole issue of people being scared of the food that they're intaking, but also scared of the political and the policy context that is supposed to be supporting them. So we should not ignore the psychological dimensions of food security as much as we're focusing on the physical dimensions and the geopolitical or local political economy dimension. So it was really excellent presentations. We have around 15-20 minutes to go for this session. So we'll open the floor now for questions. I'm going to ask Christina Dortry to speak to the comments in the chat, whereas I will begin the process by looking at the Q&As in our Q&A box. So the first comment comes from Dr. Anthony Richards. It is not a question, but it is more a request for a comment. He says, the idea of collecting ackee for canning from a large and diffuse population of women and men growers seems in some ways preferable to the situation in canned callaloo, which involves very few farmers. The stringent control of pesticide use in callaloo production restricts the harvest to a handful of maybe 5 male farmers who can provide the good agricultural practices, that is a GAP practices, which is the paperwork required for canning for export. Could you please comment? I don't know if Dr. Stanbury, you wanted to comment on that?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much. So I'm not necessarily saying that we shouldn't go around collecting from individual farms. The point I was trying to make is that if we had orchard, we could increase the volume of export considerably. That's one. Some of the things that we import, ackee, this doesn't apply to ackee because ackee is semi-processed before we export it and canned. But some of the things that we import, like mangoes, it doesn't suit us to do it collecting two boxes from farms, etc., because we are not able in those instances to ensure the same quality in terms of phytosanitary standard, disease and pest monitoring, and what you refer to as GAP. For that reason, we had to suspend some years ago, voluntarily suspend exports of mango, because getting 2 boxes from this farm, 2 from that farm, we just could not control the fruit fly. In an orchard setting, it's far easier to control. So with ackee, there is no issue really to collect 2 boxes from people, because we do process the ackee before we send it, so there are no real phytosanitary concerns. I was just trying to make the point that if we had orchard, we could, frankly speaking, do so much more in terms of exports.
Thank you, Dr. Stanbury. Our next question comes from Mr. Horace Levy. Will corn and sorghum production locally mean higher prices for chicken and beef? Even if this is true, is it still preferable to importing grain? If so, why?
I think that there is wisdom in producing at least a portion of the corn and sorghum that we use for animal feed. I said that from 2 perspectives. One, when a real crisis hits, as it did in 2008, over 30 net food exporting countries, Pakistan and others, Vietnam, etc. The first thing they did was to implement what we call export ban. So in a crisis, you cannot have an industry that depends so much on animal feed, importing everything. We have to have some critical portion of it being grown here for strategic purposes. And that is what I'm trying to say. We must try to safeguard. That's one. 2, our chicken meat, for instance, is very expensive here in relative terms, because few people know that the duty on imported chicken, whole chicken, is way over 200%. That is what we did to protect the local broiler industry. So, I mean, that results in us paying more for broiler feed, but we have to juxtapose that with the employment and the livelihood created by the plethora, myriads of people who in their backyard grow this chicken and supply Jamaica broilers. So it's a trade-off. And as a country, we have to engage that debate.
Thank you so much for your comments, Dr. Stanbury. Next question, I'm going to field it.
Dr. Northover?
I think she's...
The question is it not possible to reduce our food import bill by more than 30 to 40%?
I don't think we can sustainably go beyond that. But that's sort of a minimum, because a lot of what we won't be able to do it in the short run, because a significant part of the food import bill are actually items that if we withdraw them in a sort of precipitous way, a sudden way, we're going to leave a huge section of our population plunge in hunger. We're talking about the chicken parts, the tin mackerel, the bangamere fish, and those kind of things, the flour, the cornmeal, the rice, which are staple. So it will take us some time to develop the capacity to produce those. So I would not recommend, just shutting down everything overnight. The 40% I spoke to are those things for which we have a competitive advantage. We can in fact replace those imports without foisting higher prices for local production on our consumers.
Okay, Dr. Stanberry, we have a comment in the chat before we continue with the question and answer. It says, are the figures of irrigable agricultural lands, including the upcoming destruction of the rich arable lands, about to go to housing at Bernard Lodge? How much will this take away from our ability to grow food and our food security?
It doesn't, because the 9% includes the Bernard Lodge area, which is now fully irrigated. And that is the tragedy of what is being done with Bernard Lodge lands. Not only are they the most fertile lands, but they are the lands most equipped with irrigation infrastructure. It is really a travesty to put those lands into production. So if we take out those lands, we will be below the 9%.
And if we lose our arable land and we lose our irrigable infrastructure, it will detrimentally impact our food security.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mr. Grant, this question for you. The use of pesticides is so widespread in Jamaica. How likely is it that organic farming will be extremed? Organic produce is done by a small group and the cost is out of reach for most. So how do you think organic farming will be more accepted by farmers?
Okay, with organic farming, we create our own pesticides from herbs. There are herbs that we can use to spray our plants. We don't need chemicals. In fact, our own Scotch bonnet pepper is a very good herbicide. It's a very good insecticide, and we can use the same fruit that we produce on the farm to protect the rest of the plants. They know this. This is not anything new to them. And we have been saying to them all this while, we don't need chemicals. We just need equipment. So just create the facilities for us to get whatever equipment we need, and we can produce. Organic farming is what Jamaica started out with. I'm coming from the days when people use ashes to kill insects, and the ashes do work. Wherever you burn the leaves, you take those ashes and sprinkle around the plant, and that kills insects, right? The Scotch bonnet pepper, you cut up the Scotch bonnet pepper, put into a drum of water, and you use that water and spray the plants. So it prevents worms from coming onto the plants. Now we have the neem. The neem is another good insecticide. So we just need the government to invest with us and not invest with overseas.
And my follow-up question to that, Mr. Grant, do you think that farmers locally want to do organic farming? Do you think it's something that they're trending towards?
No, they actually are asking for that. They would prefer to do that. Most of the farmers, the real farmers I'm talking about, because you have the commercial farmers different from the natural farmers, right? The natural farmers prefer to grow their food without fertilizer. They prefer to grow their foods without insect sprays. They prefer to grow their foods from natural seeds, because the chemical seeds only give you one crop. And after that, you have to go and buy seeds again. Now, when you use the organic seeds, you can get organic seeds from the plant, from the fruits. So you set them and plant them again. So you keep replenishing your crop. So in fact, if organic farming costs less than technological farming, It's just that they are not investing with these farmers.
Thank you. Thank you. Great points indeed. And Dr. Stanberry, before you go, we have a question posed to you by Mr. Horace Levy. Have you calculated the cost of a good program for raising the kind of agriculture you would design? Is it feasible, at least if our national priorities were sensible? So I think they're asking, do you think the type of agricultural landscape you would like to see, if it's economically feasible?
Yes, it is. Significant elements of what I speak to have been costed. We, for instance, have had a National Irrigation Development Master Plan from as far back as 1998 that has really costed out what it would take to irrigate the entire, all the irrigable lands in Jamaica. The truth is, and agriculture has never had a big break in terms of concentrated investment. As a country, we have determined that our road infrastructure is important, and we have spent billions on road infrastructure, literally, because we have deemed it a priority. When was the last time agriculture had a break? The very irrigation schemes we are talking about in Royal Cobra have largely been left to us from the colonial days. We have not invested in the kind of infrastructure that will make a qualitative difference. And as a country, we need to do that. Do you know, for instance, that the Black River, all the issues we are having in South Manchester, South St. Elizabeth, relating to persistent drought, year after year, those people have been engaged in what we call dry farming. Do you know that the Black River could irrigate all of that area, which is our main crop growing area in Jamaica? We have been bold enough to run roads through the mountains going from north to south of Jamaica. Why couldn't we do the same thing with a massive irrigation system in South St. Elizabeth? So we need to take a different look on agriculture, a long-term look. I mean, it is a shame that in this day and age, we treat the 220,000 farmers who are on hillside with scant regard, and those are the people who ensure that we can get up tomorrow morning and go to Coronation Market and get a range of food that we can eat and be healthy. So we need to treat agriculture better, and it's not a subsistence business. We need to put money in it. Since cable TV has come around, do you realize that without fanfare, we have outfitted the infrastructure to distribute cable wires all over this country without 1 cent from government? Look at BPO. We have found money to build out the BPO infrastructure and provide the spaces for people to operate on. Why do we keep treating agriculture like a Cinderella? Look at tourism. We have built out the grill, we have put in the best infrastructure, roads, lighting, you name it. It's time for agriculture to get a break.
Dr. Stanbury, I want to thank you for your really informed, passionate, and deliberate presentation, as well as Mr. Errol Grant for his direct commentary, speaking to the things that are the list of demands that the farmers have for our government to stop the practices of reducing access to arable land by the farmers, and to put on their priority, number one, safe food for our community. Certainly what has been raised in both presentations is the absence of strategic planning. One of the challenges that we have is that we don't have the effective implementation of a national spatial plan that is sensitive to the issues of climate change, climate resilience, and disaster risk reduction. As Mr. Stanbury pointed out in his final comment, we need to take a different look at agriculture. We need to stop treating the farmers without respect. We treat them with scant regard, And we need to take a very focused look on how we invest in our activities that relate to rural and agricultural development. We need to put the money where our mouth is, right? We need to stop investing, planting concrete rather than planting food. So we need to have a serious investment strategy portfolio that is not just directed to the few who have the majority of the land, as was emphasized by Dr. Stanbury, that 75% of the farmers inhabit only 15% of our land, and the rest is dominated by the larger farmers and medium-sized farmers. So while we have a role for different scaled levels of farm activity, we need to make sure that we don't marginalize the smaller farmers, the ones who are on the one hectare of land, who are being pushed from the time of plantation economic and plantation society systems onto marginal lands, overtaxed, overburdened, and not given the respect. Instead, they are really treated with scant regard, as Dr. Stanbury has emphasized. So our rural research cluster is certainly focused on trying to put the agenda spotlight on fleeing the plantation for sustainable food systems. And I just want to thank our presenters and our support system. In particular, I want to thank Christina Daughtry, who so ably jumped in when my power was disconnected to continue the line of questioning. Christina is a PhD graduate student at the University of West Indies in the Department of Geography, and she's also working on a regional food insecurity project as a global challenges research funded project that that she's working with me on food insecurity in a time of climate change. So I think we could have taken a lot more questions, but I think I don't know if there are any questions that we didn't address, Christina, but I don't want to necessarily leave out any burning comments, but given that I had lost power, some of the questions in the chat were lost to me. So I'm not sure if all the questions were addressed, but if there are any burning questions or issues, certainly we can continue the conversations in our subsequent speaker series. And I just wanted to highlight that we also have a new email that you can contact us at, which is uisalise.srad@gmail.com. So uisalise.srad@gmail.com. So you can contact us, and we'll be willing to entertain your questions and have offline discussions and continue the conversations there. So I'd like to know, turn the session back over to our chair, who will thank additional individuals. I also wanted to shout out Mr. Orion Spence, who did the posters, and Mr. Richard Leach, who did the technical assistance, managing this Zoom platform and getting us all integrated and ready for the discussions that we had today. Mr. Errol Grant, he was disconnected. He's just joined us again. So Errol, we were wrapping up the conversation, but before we do, I would just like to give perhaps our presenters the final word before we turn over to the chair. So Errol, if you had any questions yourself that you wanted to throw open to us, or final word, please do so now. I'll give you each around 1 minute, 1 to 2 minutes to wrap up, and then we'll ask Dr. Williams to close the show.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Northover again. What I would like to say is that we should continue this movement in getting our farmers settled, because that's the aim, getting our farmers settled, and to get the government to see and to believe in us as farmers and not believe in farmers overseas, because what they are doing is not what we do. And we are more concerned with the health of our citizens than those people are. They are more concerned with their profits, right? And that is what is ruining us. Jamaicans were once upon a time thought of as very healthy people. No, we can't say that. A lot of diseases are broken out in Jamaica, which were not here before. And it is as a result of our diet. So this forum should see to it that whatever we say pertaining to our farms, or farmers, or citizens, or country, continue. We should continue it and take it to the highest level. If it means we have to go to even the Human Rights Court, then we should, because it is imperative.
Thank you. It is imperative. Certainly, we have seen that these issues are not being fabricated. They are real, they are concrete, and the documentation, the evidence is there. So it's a question of appropriate policy direction at this point for the medium, the short run, the medium, and the long run. But what we do know is that the current trajectories within the Jamaican economy, with the rising food import bill, the high levels of non-communicable diseases, chronic diseases, and the lack of respect that is going to the farmers with the dispossessions and displacements in Bernard Lodge that has been highlighted by both speakers, that all of that needs to be stopped and a new direction taken if we are serious and we're willing to walk the walk and talk the talk at the same time. So thank you all for your time. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Williams, the chair of our SALISES seminar series, to close our proceedings.
Thank you very much, Dr. Northover. All that is left for me is to say a big thank you to the audience for asking such pointed and relevant questions. Thank you, the presenters. Thank you, the moderator. And big thank you to everyone who works in the background, Richard, Christina, Samara, Oreen, everybody that makes this webinar such a success. And I'll see you at the next webinar in the speaker series. Thank you very much for your presence. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you very much, Richard and team. Goodbye for now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for those who attended. Next one, September the 1st. Keep it in your diary.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.